We're filming this afternoon for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive in Chautauqua, New York, and I am very pleased to welcome Michael Moore.
Thank you, Mark.
Whitney Balliet called the greatest living bassist. Did you see that quote?
Oh, did I see it? I did one whole room in that article. Well, yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And it was nice to read, but it was tough to live with.
Yeah.
It was tough to live with because I mean I didn't agree, and you know it's the kind of thing that it made a lot of enemies. People I didn't even know would come up to me and say, you know, like I wrote like I've written it. Yeah, you know, that kind of thing. So it was a blessing and a curse, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's impossible to say that one person is the greatest living something because there's so many parameters involved.
It's not a high jump contest.
Yeah.
And I think at the time he had quite carte blanche at the magazine to say whatever he wanted. And I noticed in later books the editors made him take that first line out, which I agreed with. You know, I think that it was when they actually went to the editor to publish the book, they made him take that out.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, the article was fine without it. It was actually much easier on me and everybody else. But by that time, the damage or whatever.
Right, and it'll show up for a while in
yeah.
programs much like it did here.
Right,
yeah.
Of course. And I must say I've used it myself in my publicity.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, you came from father was a guitarist,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a musical family situation?
Yeah, it was, my father was a jazz guitarist and a very good one, and my mother was a vocal music teacher and piano major, and taught piano and taught music. Actually was my music teacher in elementary school when I was going to school. And so, yeah, I grew up listening to a lot of great jazz records from the time I was very little, and I think I certainly got my passion for the music from my father, because he was very passionate. We were playing Charlie Christian solos over and over, and tears running down his eyes, you know, things like that.
Kidding.
And I saw that from the time I was a kid. He was affected very emotionally by the music, as I was, and so yeah, that was very important beginning.
Did you two end up playing together?
Did, yeah. Which was also had its flip side to it. My father was also very particular about the bass notes, and he would take me on jobs when I was about 15 years old, and I was just, you know, finding my way around on the instrument, and I have to go out and fake 30 or 40 tunes in an hour. And as you might expect, I played a lot of wrong notes, and he was not very understanding about it. He somehow thought that I should just know them by some kind of magic here, and so that's why I'm still in therapy, Monk, after all these years.
Well, gee, faking tunes you don't know on the bass, I mean, that's about as hard as you could get.
Well, that's kind of the curse of the instrument, though. I mean, even on, say, on a party like this, you'll go up and the horn players will call a tune, and if the piano player knows it, or the guitarist knows it, you're going to play it. They're not going to not play it if you say, well, gee, I'm not sure about this. Oh, you'll hear it, you know. And that's kind of the nature of the instrument. And I tell my students that you know, you turn on the radio or put on a Frank Sinatra record and play along with it. Try to find the bass notes, because that's a lot of what the job is about. And you don't, very rarely, unless it's your own group, do you get to call the songs. You know, so that's one of the real challenges of being a bass player, I think.
Along with carting your instrument around.
Well, that's the worst part of it. That's definitely the worst part of it. Yeah.
Do you ever go to places where they'll provide a bass for you, or
Oh, I do that quite a bit. I just came off a tour of England, and I happened to know the instruments I was going to use in advance. So, except for one, and that was a bass player whose bass was almost unplayable. So I sounded like that 15-year-old kid again, you know. But you know, you either pay for it by getting the instrument there, so then you're comfortable on the bandstand, or you know, have it the easiest in getting there and then pay for it on the bandstand. So it's even if it's somebody else's instrument that's good, it's never set up exactly the way you want it, and so it's a real problem. Now Bob Haggard, for example, is going to use my bass because he didn't want to bring one, so he'll be using mine. So it's not set up, I'm sure, the way he would prefer it to be. Right. But that's what we do as bass players.
You must have got significant classical training in the conservatory.
Well, I did. I didn't stay in the conservatory that long, but when I first started playing the bass, I was thumping around on it, you know, and thinking I was getting pretty good. My father brought home a bow, and he said, "Here, try it with this." And it was so depressing when I did it. I didn't touch the bass for about 2 weeks, and I mean, I really thought, do I really want to do this, you know? And he said, well, if you're going to play the thing, you got to, you know, learn how to play it right. You know? And I started with the principal bassist in the symphony at the time in Cincinnati when I was still in high school. And then as I continued studying with the bow. That first teacher was Harold Roberts, who was the principal, and then I studied with Frank Proto in Cincinnati, who had just come from New York and joined the orchestra there. And then when I moved to Manhattan, I studied with Orrin O'Brien, who's a lady bassist in the Philharmonics, been there for some years. So I continued to study through the years. And then my work with Gene Bertoncini kind of, because he wanted to do a lot of things with the bow, kind of forced me into doing it in public. Which, you know, was the kind of thing you had practiced at home, but I was afraid to play solos in particular out. But working with him kind of encouraged me to do that, made me work on it more.
Mm-hmm. What is it about his playing that's kept you two together?
Well, I think number one, he gets jobs.
Uh-huh.
You know, but I think the thing is that. You know, he has a great sense of arranging for the two instruments. Again, featuring the bass in a very nice way, and he encouraged me to do things with the bow that I hadn't done, and he came up with really, most of the time, I don't like jazz and classical mixed together. I find that usually it doesn't work, and for one reason or the other. It takes away from both, you know. But his arrangements seem to work as far as the integrity of both. You know, the classical part was done with integrity, and the jazz was separate enough that it, you know, that worked. And the timbre of the two instruments, the classical guitar with the bass, it was unusual, and it was. I think. One of the things that I miss nowadays in music, there are very few bands around anymore. There are very few arranged groups, and there was, for a lot of reasons, economic reasons, mostly. And and I think that's one of the things that really encouraged me to keep working with Gene, is we had material worked out. We have a good repertoire. If we knew that it's nice to go out on the bandstand for me and know what you're going to do, and to know and to have the confidence that you're going to get out there and you're going to have material that's going to make a nice performance for the people, whether you're having a good night as far as improvisation is concerned or not. You know you're going to be able to go over. And
I really enjoy hearing a combo, a small ensemble that is basically a jazz unit, but every once in a while they'll do something that you know has been arranged and rehearsed.
Right.
I think it really adds a lot to the performance that group took the time to do that.
I feel the same way. When I like T.S. Monk's band, you know, Thelonious Monk Jr. I mean, I think one of the nice, I heard them, and they have their arrangements, and they're not reading music, they have their act together, and the improvisation is very good. But the thing, there are a lot of great improvisers around nowadays, you know, but there are very few bands. And looking back in history, I mean, I grew up with the Nat Cole trio. My father had a trio based like that, on that kind of thing, and those tight arrangements, and Benny Goodman's trios and quartets, and all the groups that I admired as I grew up were very, very well thought out and very well rehearsed, and the improvisation was a great part of it, but so were the arrangements. That's why, like, one of the bands that I worked with in my young years was so important to me, which was George Barnes and Ruby Braff quartet records. And we rehearsed a lot, and the music shows it, and I still listen to those things, and they still sound fresh and good to me because of that.
Yeah. You went with Woody Herman at a pretty early age.
20 years old, yeah.
20 years old.
Yeah.
It must have been quite of an experience, because you went overseas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I joined a band in Fort Worth, Texas, and I was 20. And I remember it was the day after Christmas, and I was absolutely petrified, you know. Flew down there by myself with the bass and joined the band and went to work that night. And it was a great band. Sound This Go and Bill Chase was that band, and Nat Pierce was playing piano, and Ronnie Zito was playing drums, and I went through my growing pains, you know, with Woody. You know, I was a kid and very insecure, and but I ended up staying for. It says in the program I was there for 3 years, but it was just a year I was there. But during that year we did a lot of share of one-nighters, and we also did a tour. We went to England, and then we also went to a 2.5-month tour of Africa, State Department tour. And we were all over Africa. We were in Tanga, Tanzania, Kampala, Uganda. I had my 21st birthday. Actually, Woody's birthday is the same day as mine. And we had our 21st birthday. I had my 21st birthday in Casablanca. And Woody bought me a drink, and it was one of my good lines that I came up with. You know, sometimes you think of them, but you think about them too late. But I came up with it. He says, "Son, you got a life of misery ahead of you." And I said, "I'm not going to stay on the band that long, Woody." But he loved it. He broke up, and but we had it was Carl Fontana was on that band, and there were some great players, and we had. Really interesting time, 2.5 months, very memorable.
Yeah. Was there a conscious decision at some point, he said, I have to move to New York?
Yeah, there was. I was, I think, 24. I'd come back after working with Woody, and I went back and started. I had a great job in Cincinnati in the Playboy Club, and actually with Cal Collins, who's on this, and I've known Cal since I was a kid. He actually was a friend of my father's, and Cal is one of the great jazz guitar players. I don't know whether you're familiar with his playing, but he's always been great, and we had a steady job at the Playboy Club for a couple of years, 2.5 years, something like that.
As a duo? As
a trio, with Ron McCurdy, a drummer, lived there, and it was the best job to this day that I've ever had, and I was playing jazz 5 hours a night with a great group and bunnies to look at and great food, and
wow.
And I thought, gee, I thought the music business is wonderful, you know, and I didn't know it was going to be steadily downhill for me, but and then that came to an end. That job came to an end, and I thought, well, you know, I mean, it's back to the same cycle of clubs and stuff in Cincinnati, and I figured, well, it's time to move to New York. And my father never left town; always stayed in Cincinnati, and I profited, I think, by his example. That you know, to a degree, it was a dead-end street for him, and he was a much better player than than that and would have had a much better career, I think, had he moved or taken some advantage. He had chances to leave and didn't, you know. So I thought it was, I didn't want to make that mistake.
When you look at the local 802 union book, you see an awful lot of players. And what was it like trying to find a niche
It was really, my wife at the time had a job, so it took, in New York, and it took financial pressure off, which I think that's the main thing. To find an, I mean, it's, New York, it was, in that time, there was a lot more work in town in '68, but it was very, very frightening to me. Again, I was still very insecure, and I was not the kind of guy to go out and sit in clubs and say, here I am, which I've known subsequent years guys that had that kind of moxie, and I admire that, but I had a few contacts from Woody's band, and I think I played with John Bunch someplace, a great piano player, and he recommended me to Marian McPartland. And I played with Marian McPartland, and she liked me and hired me, and that kind of got me started and gave me some credentials, and she was very supportive and played my songs, and was very encouraging, you know, and that was kind of what got me started working with Marian in New York.
There's some nice quotes in the Jazz Times article that just came out about her. Have you seen it yet?
No, I haven't seen it.
I have it with me. We'll
good.
take a
I'd
look
like to
at
read it. Yeah.
It's got you 2 or 3 times.
Oh, really?
Talking about her. And,
oh, good. I'd like to see it. Yeah.
Yeah, she's a marvelous lady. And was this at the Hickory House you played, or was that after
No,
that?
it was after that. The Hickory House had closed, I think, at that point. We worked at a place called The Apartment, and it was the first time I met Ruby Braff was there. He came and sat in with us, and we had a great time traveling around together and playing, and it gave me confidence in it. Bobby Hackett, I met Bobby Hackett and played with him at that time. She was doing a Christmas present to a friend in Sherman, somebody I forget now, who in Europe, and she wanted to send them a tape. So Hackett came in and read her songs down, and just like an angel, just played like an angel. Yeah, Marian, nice tunes, you know. And Hank O'Neill recorded it at Sherman Fairchild's house. It was, and you know, it was like, for me, it was like, I just come to New York and I'm playing with Marian and playing with Bobby Hackett, and it was real exciting.
Years later, you played on a record of hers I have, Ambiance. There was some pretty adventurous playing on that.
Yeah, I think that Marian and I talked about that recently. I mean, and some of those tunes, there are 3 or 4 of my tunes are on there, and they were pretty avant-garde. I was kind of in that era of player at the time, and Marian, always wanting to be young and musically and keep up with what's going on, was surrounded herself with young players and wanted to get into what they were into and so forth and so on. But it's funny, after that, with me, I kind of spent my time in that group of people. Like, we had a space, it was called The Space, and it was a bunch of musicians, and we all shared it, and we put on our own concerts in the lofts and things like that. And there was a lot of experimental music. Dave Liebman came out of that, and Richie Byrek, and it was a lot of avant-garde things. And right at that time, I started playing with Ruby Braff and George Barnes, and and I'd grown up playing a lot of, traditional music with my father, but, you're wrapped up with what your peers are doing, and we played a lot of free music and so forth and so on. And I think when I got with Ruby and George and played in that quartet and everything, it kind of reset me in a way, in a more, not that I stopped playing the other kind of music, but I think in a way it made me realize how important songs were to me, and songs of 30s and 40s in particular, and the great songwriters, because that's what they were into, is the love of the American popular song. And I think that really in a way brought me back inside more, and I haven't really left that since then. I really feel that, you know, I did my experimentation, and I feel that now that, or as far as like trying to, I think it was done about as well as it can be done by a lot of players that I loved at the time in the 60s, and Ornette, and you know, who some of the guys are still around, and some of those wonderful Paul Bley, Gary Peacock, and that kind of music.
It's always been a struggle with that kind of music as far as your audience reception to it, I think. And
right.
I don't know if after a while you say, maybe this isn't valid for anyone except myself, perhaps.
Well, I think it's a lot more fun to do than it is to listen to. I think that's one of the problems of the music with a lot of that kind of. It can become very self-indulgent, and when I started playing with Ruby and George, everything was thought of as you know, solos weren't too long. They kind of they used Benny's trios and quartets as a good example of, you know, where nobody played too long. There were no 40-chorus solos and musicians standing around and talking to one another. It was thought out, and very with the audience in mind, but also from I don't think as much as the audience in mind, just a real definite feeling about form and melody and shape, as much as whether the audience is going to like it or not. And I got wrapped up in that too. And it's to the point now where I can't stand, you know, and as a bass player, sometimes I find myself in those situations where the horn players are playing chorus after chorus after chorus, and you know, I'm getting bored. So I can imagine how the audience is feeling. You know, and because I got something to do, you know, and I really think that the discipline of that kind of thing is really important in a player, is to, you know, Lester Young could compose in 8 bars something that you can study the rest of your life. You know, you didn't need 30 or 40 choruses to say something. You know, and I think a lot of that got lost in certain periods of exploration. So I don't see it as that I actually regressed. I see it that I progressed out of that kind of experimentation and went back into thinking about tighter forms and things.
Right. If you were talking to a group of young musicians, which I know you do a lot, can you describe how you think of your role as a bassist?
Sure. Well, I do a lot of teaching, and I think that the bass is probably, maybe, as Dizzy said, that's the first thing he got for a big band. It was a good bass player. We go from there. And I think it is probably I wouldn't say the most important, but right in there with the drums and the piano and the rhythm, it's very essential. And the feel, the team spirit that you have to develop as a bass player, I think, is very important. I mean, I don't care about the solos, that can come later, but I always tell bass players, time, feeling is the most important thing that you have to shoot for right away, and work towards that in solos later on, or, you know, at the same time, but never forgetting the function of the instrument. And you really have to, in a way, a lot of times a great bass player, I think, is not noticed. I always I correlate it to being a catcher. I used to be a catcher in baseball. And I think about it as kind of the catcher. He's not noticed on the ball field until he makes a mistake. And the bass player is kind of the same way. You shouldn't be noticed that much. You should be felt, and the rhythm should sound good, but the bass should, and until it comes to the solo, he shouldn't stand out as like by playing a lot of tricks and things like that. There have been bass players through centuries, or through the last century, that stand out no matter what they do. But I think when you're accompanying, you should not disappear, but not be so noticeable until it comes time to play a soloist. And that takes a certain amount of almost a Zen attitude of thinking about, the unit and putting yourself out in front in the audience and saying, how is the band sounding? Thinking about the section of the rhythm section as a unit. Mm-hmm. And volume has a lot to do with it. You can't be too loud, because then you overpower the acoustic instruments on the bandstand. It's very important to set your volume, if you're using an amplifier, to the keyboards, because the piano, in particular the acoustic piano, because that can't get any louder than it is. So if you crank up the amplifier, then the whole thing is destroyed. You haven't got a chance. So there's a lot of elements that go into it, but mainly being a team player and kind of maybe subjugating your ego just a little bit to do it.
The amplification issue, seems like things tend to get louder as years go by, and I'm not sure why.
Well, I noticed that the whole society is getting louder. Everything's getting louder. If you go to the theater, if you go to everything is mic'd very heavily, and I don't know whether collectively as the human species, our hearing is getting worse all the time, and which makes everything get louder, which makes our hearing get worse all the time. I'm sure if we went back 200 years, we would be surprised at how quiet everything was. But I think it's all the I go to places where I'm going to play, and the sound people will have this huge speakers set up beforehand, and they'll be playing things through the speakers to test them and so forth, and are having bands on, even jazz records, everything, and they're so loud I can't hardly stand to be there. And we're constantly talking over the top of music. I mean, if you're in a nightclub, you finish playing. As soon as you finish playing, they turn on the music. But when you come into the place, the music is going, so the ear is never hungry for music. You're saturated with sound all the time, and I think there's a certain amount of fatigue that sets in with that too, and I think it's detrimental to concerts. I mean, if you go hear a Mozart string quartet, before you sit down, they're not playing somebody else's recording of the same Mozart quartet through big loud speakers that was done in a studio with the optimum equipment and so forth and so on. But you go to a jazz club or a concert a lot of times, you come in, they're playing the best Benny Goodman big band recording, all redone through these huge speakers. There's no way, for number one, that you can compete with it in a way, because it's almost an unfair comparison to make. Plus the fact that your ears are worn out by the time the band starts.
That's a great thought. How can you? The anticipation of the music is kind of killed then.
Exactly.
Because you come into it, it's already there, and
it's one of my real pet peeves. I mean, you should come into a room and be anticipating the music and hungry for it, just like you are for a meal, And but it's almost unheard of that a club doesn't have the music on right up to the moment. I mean, I can't even sometimes find time to tune up, because the music is going on right to the time the guys get on the bandstand, and there's music playing, and I'm trying to get it in tune with the piano, and the music is playing at the same time. And if you, and you know, you go into, I want silence when I go to a restaurant. I don't care if they're playing classical music, which is better than the rock and roll crap that you have to listen to most of the time. But if I go into a restaurant, I just like to hear nothing, you know? I mean, I don't want to talk over Beethoven and Mozart, and I'd like to sit down and listen to them, you know, not have it, you know, I'm like Jerry Ford, I can't eat and listen at the same time, you know? And
it's interesting, even tonight, it looks like they have a setup where the people are going to be eating dinner during the first significant portion of this party. These jazz parties are an interesting kind of phenomenon. Do you enjoy making the circuit on these things?
I do. I've been doing them now for, I guess, I started doing them back in the 70s, mid-70s, I think. So I've been doing them a long time. I naturally enjoy some more than others, you know, depending upon circumstances. The thing that I don't like about them is the fact that they're big jam sessions and the lack of organization that goes on, and because of the nature of the beast. And I mean, it's a phenomenon that in a way has taken place of a lot of clubs and things of yesteryear that are no longer in existence. And I'm grateful for them. But again, I think it's sad that there's just not, that everybody's hired as an individual. It's like the George Steinbrenner way of running a baseball team. You know, you hire stars, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to play well together. You know, and whereas you could take any one of these guys that you got here and say, why don't you bring your group or a group of guys, and you know, maybe have 4 or 5 different groups,
right?
As opposed to a name horn player from California, name horn player from Australia, name horn player, and everybody meets and says, what are we going to play? So I think that's the downside of it. At the same time, there's also some magic that happens when you throw those things together too, that may not have happened either. But I think that that's the kind of thing that I see running through the last 20 years of doing them, is the same kind of the lack of groups. Now there are a few of the guys that have done it so much that they make you think it was already thought out and well done. Almost organized, you know.
Maybe some kind of balance would be nice if they had a band during part of the evening and then did the more traditional format. That's
which Joe tries, I think, to do here. I mean, like with...
we do a Hal Smith's...
he has some groups.
Roadrunners.
And Becky Kilgore and Dave recorded together, so they have material to work from. So they're... and then, you know, you have somebody like Dave McKenna, which is like a whole orchestra by himself. You know what I mean? And so, Joe knows how to do that, and he knows how to mix guys like Cal and I playing duo together and so forth. And we have, you know, we've played together over the years, and he knows to a degree what's going to work. And it's just, again, there's not many groups around anymore, except a few very famous ones. And I'm probably a little more complicated to record than other bass players. Not all other bass, but modern bass players who use the whole instrument, the upper register. It's hard to get an overall sound in the bass. If you stay in one register and stay down in the low register, that's kind of what you're getting when you're accompanying. And then it's almost like you're recording 2 instruments, because it's almost like playing 2 instruments. So there's a what sounds good soloistically doesn't necessarily then you got to change the adjust it. And so it's hard for me in a live situation to get a sound that sounds good for solos and accompaniment too. So it's difficult to record, and the instrument is hard to record on top of it. Any engineer, I think, will tell you it's the hardest one to get because it's soft. You know, if you made a string long enough to vibrate that chamber, it would be as tall as this room. I mean, they made a bass violin where acoustically it was perfect. It takes two people to play it because if you see the size of the chamber, if you think of the string on a violin in proportion to the body, or a cello string is important, the body, and then you think now the same length of string for the body of the bass. It takes somebody on a ladder to play. So acoustically, you're starting off with this
a little imperfect.
very imperfect instrument, and it's very you're always trying to get a big sound out of something that you're not capable of really vibrating the whole thing. So it's tough. It's tough to record, and so and then in the '70s I did a lot of records, and the engineers went with the electronic pickups, and they got the worst bass sound of all during those periods, and because it was easy for them, they didn't have to worry about leakage from drums or anything else. They just plug it directly into the board. And I can't listen to them. There are some records that I'm on where the music is really good, but I can't listen to them because of the sound of the instrument. It has a real hard electric sound, not acoustic at all. And it'll be the only instrument that sounds that way. You know, the piano's okay, the drums are all right, and everything else, and the bass sounds like a buzzsaw or something. So,
did you ever play electric bass?
I did.
Yeah.
I actually, when I came to New York, everybody said, well, if you're going to work, you better play electric bass. Now, I just bought one when I brought it to New York, and a friend of mine, Dave Matthews, was writing for James Brown. He was his arranger. And so I'm actually on some James Brown records.
No kidding.
Yeah, talking loud and saying nothing, and a couple of hits he had, actually. One about drugs, a waltz about drugs.
And this came through just a studio, in a studio situation, and you knew the fellow who was doing the arrangements. And
yeah, well, actually, I went on the road with him.
Oh.
He'd take two bands. We did the Dick Cavett show with him. We did. He had big band arrangements, and I played in that, and then he had his regular band on stage. So we played a couple of places where it was a big.
Wow.
And he carried two rhythm sections, and and it was fun. You know, rhythmically, that music is exciting stuff. You know, and so it was fun. But then very shortly after that, some guys started showing up who that was their main instrument in New York. And you were talking about New York being a place where you find your niche. When Jaco Pastorius showed up playing electric bass, and Will Lee and a couple other guys around who were really into it, I said, well, I never liked practicing the instrument. You know, it was never, for me, I never liked the sound much. And I always thought it was more of a double for a guitar player than for an acoustic bass player. And I never liked it very much, so I said, well, and I was getting pretty busy on upright by that time. And I gave my electric bass away and just said I wasn't going to. I could have kept doing it half-assed, you know, for the rest of my life. And but I didn't feel real honest about that, and I felt like the guys that were really serious about it should have the work, you know. And I've always been kind of stupid like that as far as, you know, somebody called me up for an orchestra date, and I say, you know, there are guys in New York, that's all they do is play. They play that stuff great, you know. And so I wouldn't go, you know, and then I'd find out that they hired somebody else that shouldn't have done it either, you know, and I'm sitting at home saying, you know, kicking myself, but there's no justice in any of that.
I'm going to pause just for a second to make sure that, did they change your playing schedule at all?
No, I'm still okay, yeah.
Okay.
I'm just going to have dinner, and while they're playing, I'm going to have dinner and Try not to make too much noise.
Right. Clack,
Try
clack,
to concentrate
click,
and
clack.
eat at the same time.
Okay. You have received some nice reviews on this particular CD. Just read one in Jazz Times, I believe.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'll try to find it for you.
Yeah, I'd love to.
In fact, I think they mentioned your tune here,
The Old New Waltz. Mm-hmm.
Tell me how that tune
Came about?
came about.
Well, I left the country at one point. I actually moved to India in '89. I don't know whether you knew that. I quit playing the bass, went to India, ended up in London. It didn't work out in India, and ended up in London. I was playing piano, and but mostly not doing much of anything. And then I started playing bass again over there. But I was spending a lot of time in the piano, and I occasionally was coming back to New York, and I've spent a lot of time writing around that time, and I didn't think much of that tune. I thought it was, I knew it worked, was the kind of thing where I thought, well, you know, it's okay. And then we got called for this, to do this recording when I was going to be back, and everybody was supposed to submit a song. And so, I mean, I didn't even have it written out properly or anything, so I wrote it out and brought it back. And I have no judgment about the songs that I write. And there's a song with Marian McPartland on Ambience called Wisdom of the Heart. I wrote. It was one, I think, the first song I wrote. And it's just a simple little waltz, very short, kind of goes some interesting place harmonically. And everybody loved that song, you know. I mean, people Gil Evans came up to me and said, you got any more songs like the Wisdom of the Heart? And I'm saying, wow, you know. Alec Wilder liked the song, you know, and wrote me a letter about it. And I'm saying, wow, I don't get it, you know. But, you know, I mean, that they liked it was such a thrill, but, and Marian liked it, and a lot of people liked that song. It was just a short little waltz, and I wrote this one, and I've had great response from that. You know, people said, oh, they love this song. People written lyrics for it and said, I really love that song. Another band, I walked into a place down in St. Louis, the trio, and they were played the song for it. It was the first time in my life somebody
That's a thrill.
said, hey, we're going to play your song. And they, I mean, and so, I mean, that had never happened to me before. And so I don't, I mean, I like it, and I think it's pretty, but I don't have any, and it may be one of the best things I've written. I don't write a lot, you know, I write in spurts, but you know, it's, I knew it worked, and it was that kind of thing, but I didn't have any great feeling about it.
It's interesting. It may, the opposite may happen sometime. You may write something that you just think is the best thing.
Oh, that has happened.
Okay.
That's happened more often than the other way around. I said, wow, well, wait, and then give it to somebody and say, oh, that's nice, you know, and nobody. That's so. I mean, I don't know whether we ever really know, can tell about, or whether I can. Maybe other people can. I'm sure. But you wonder if, you know, if Jerome Kern, when he finished All the Things You Are, said, I've just written a classic. You know, this is going to be the greatest, one of the greatest songs of ever, and it's perfect, and it's blah blah. Or whether he just thought, well, I did that one today, and I got 4 more to do for next. You know what I mean?
How is, you wonder if how jazz musicians, why they've chosen certain songs to latch onto like that. You know, I mean, it seems so perfect for improvising and the whole thing, but like you said, he may have had no idea that was going to happen with that particular tune.
Yeah, I think a tune, somebody said to me one time, a tune has a life of its own. It's like you're giving birth to a child and you send it out into the world, and you don't know what's going to happen to it, or where it's going to go, or what's going to, you know, and I really kind of kick myself for not doing more writing, because It is, the more you do it, the better. It's like anything else. The more you do it, the better at it you get. And to be, disciplined enough to sit down every day and say, okay, I'm going to write for 2 hours, and whatever comes out, and just kind of let it alone and not rework it or not go over and over and just see what happens. You know, I mean, wonderful things happen when you just go to that well every day. You know, and I don't do it enough. You know, I'm a compulsive practicing person. You know, I practice a lot, and I like. Oh, I don't call it practicing. I'm actually playing, but I'm not compulsive about anything. There's anything else. That and pasta. They're only two things that I'm compulsive
I hope they have
about.
some for you tonight.
Yeah.
What, if you don't mind me asking, caused you to want to leave the country?
Oh, there was a lot of personal reasons, but financial pressure to a great extent. My wife at the time was of Indian origin, and we were living in Pennsylvania. I was driving 150 miles back and forth every day to work, and a lot of the time, and barely making ends meet. And I was pretty, things weren't so good financially, and we had the idea of kind of selling our house in India and moving to India. My son could have gone to private school there. With the money we got for selling our house, they were giving 13% tax-free interest on it. Over there, we could have lived very well. I could have just written, I thought I had this thing I was going to start writing. And my son would go to private school. He was young at the time, 5 or 6, and then we'd come back and play and basically walk away from the rat race, But it didn't work out. Inflation was running at 18%, and so the fixed income that was going to be going down. My son would have never caught up in school. They start him at like the age of 2 over there. 3 years old. So there was a whole lot. And there were other reasons. So Plan B was to go to England, and it was actually a very good learning experience for me, a growth experience, because first of all, I got to the point where I almost didn't enjoy going to work anymore, didn't enjoy playing music, didn't enjoy the life anymore. I wanted it to be over, And when I got to England, and subsequently that marriage broke up, and all of a sudden I was back in music. I had students, and I was playing piano, and I go out and I rediscovered that I had this whole life in music, and I rediscovered the love of playing. And it was like people talk about being born again Christians. I was a born again musician, and I started all with a whole new attitude, and it was a very good growth experience. It was. They say, when things are at their absolute worst, wait, and it could be the best thing to happen. And it turned out the whole process was a very good reaffirmation of music and life.
Yeah, it's positive. I'm glad to hear that. You've worked with about the greatest in the business, and the list keeps coming. And I'm really glad to see some of the younger players coming, Harry Allen and those guys, who embracing this kind of music and keeping it alive.
Harry told me that Johnny Mandel heard his record, called him on the phone. He didn't know him. Called him on the phone and said how he left a message on his answer machine saying he'd heard his CD and said how he was much relieved to know that jazz was in the hands of young players like him, and how good it made him feel, which, you know, was a great day for Harry, you know. But it's true. I mean, you think that I remember when Scott Hamilton came around for the first time, and, you know, at that, nobody remembers particularly what was going on and now at the time, but Scott was a real pioneer in a way, because, I mean, it wasn't that he hadn't heard John Coltrane or Ornette or all the people we were talking about before. He'd heard all that, but he liked playing songs, and he liked playing, and everybody was like, wow.
What a concept.
What a concept, you know. And here's this young guy doing it. He was in his 20s when I met him, and he was playing like that. And I really think a lot of this is connected to Ruby Braff, because Ruby went around bebop in a way. He's not really a bebopper. He was a song player, but a modern song player, even though he was Louis Armstrong and Hackett, and those were his influences and everything. But Ruby harmonically and everything is very advanced, you know. I really understand. But his song and and I think he was a hero to a lot of these younger guys that came along. And Ruby just kind of, like, through that whole period, stuck to his guns, played played great songs, and never went the other route at all. And I think that's kind of the thread that runs then into Scott, and Harry's the next generation. Harry loved Scott, you know, and it's. We just did a tour in England with the two of them playing together. It was great, and they both sounded wonderful. I mean, it just was a great, nice experience. So it is true. There are young players out there that come along that, you know, have kind of digested the whole thing, and Ken Poplawski is another one. You know, I mean, he probably has better record collection and knows. Is more eclectic than I have ever been, you know, as far as what he listens to and everything else. But he, you know, he knows how he wants to play, and what he loves is those songs and that, and carrying on that tradition.
So you think the future of jazz is, it still has a future?
Well, my feeling is everybody says, you know, these jazz parties, everybody's white-haired in the audience and everything, and do you think there's a future? And I said, well, if we're lucky, we'll all die off at the same time. You know? And it will all go with the audience, you know. But then, and Harry says, well, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
You know, and I actually, sometimes, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, people like to say that, but I'm glad I'm at the age I am. I don't think I'd want to be 25 and liking the music that I like and trying to make a living at it. I'm a pessimist enough to think that if Frank Sinatra were starting out singing now, he'd have a hell of a time getting a job. And because of the climate of the times and the kind of music that's popular. So I don't know. I don't know whether it'd be around. All I know is I'm 52, and maybe I can eke out a living for another 25 years or something. But I mean, certainly, it's going on in the schools, you know, which I think is a pro. There's a pro and con to that. I think that, like classical music, when it got institutionalized, I don't think it was healthy for the music, because it got to the point where classical players only read notes off a page. But Mozart, Beethoven, and up through Chopin were all improvisers. It was. You know, they all sit down and scare you to death. They throw each other themes and improvise on them. And I think now in jazz education, a lot of that is happening in schools where they have the real book, they have a set of chords and scales that go, and it's very much like more of an institutionalized thing. And that's why I think it's important to guys like Harry, who are song players. That kind of thing is not being taught in the colleges. And and I think that's the important thread that's going through. is the Harry Allens and the Ken Poplawskis, and the guys that are, a lot of them coming out of music schools, they don't know any songs. They can play their instruments, and they can, any chord, they can play a scale that goes with any chord, and you know, play their own originals or somebody else's originals that are set up for these improvisations. But there's not the connection to melody and the love of melody and great songs in their play. In fact, I have a student as a young guitarist who's from this whole system that I was telling you about, college, he graduated, plays great. I mean, he plays the guitar beautifully, he plays beautiful solos and everything, and he's coming to me for lessons to teach him songs because he doesn't know any songs. And I say, well, play a 4-bar intro to the song. We'll play a thing. He doesn't know how to play a 4-bar introduction. Well, what do I do? You know, things like that. Now, that's the kind of thing that happens in school. But when you come up playing on the street or playing in clubs, that's the kind of thing you learn when you're very young. So that's the kind of thing that's not really being done. And I, in fact, I was talking to Howard about, I had an idea that that would be a good kind of school to start, would be the American popular song and this kind of thing, and teach that.
Sounds like a great idea, and to have people that teaching that are professional players. Right. Because I think sometimes the students are being taught by teachers who have just been teachers. Right. And that they are great players themselves, but as you say, they might not know the songs enough themselves that they can pass it on. I guess, you know, there's less venues to play. That's right. And sometimes I think we don't need more players, we need more audience. Oh, I agree. And I feel that way about students a lot of times, and we've talked about it. Well, you know, this guy's not going to be a great player. He's not going to, why waste time with the student is not great? You know, I said, well, you're making somebody is going to go out, if nothing else, he's going to be able to appreciate somebody who can do it and go buy a CD. I mean, if we were, we're all amateur athletes, and that's why sports demand so much money. But we're not amateur artists, and we're not amateur in this country, I'm speaking of. We're not amateur artists, we're not amateur musicians. And that's why the arts are in such bad shape. If everybody can appreciate what Michael Jordan does, because everybody's tried to shoot a basket sometime or another, but nobody's tried to, you know, it's not taught in school anymore. Music's not taught in elementary school like it was, and so people don't appreciate, you know, what Harry Allen can do. You know, I mean, if he were a comparable baseball player, you know, I mean, he would be. You know, a national hero, you know, he would, just because everybody has played a little baseball in their lives. And so I think it really goes back, when I say it's not good that it's in the schools, I think it should be much more exposure to jazz, good jazz, at a younger age, you know, and maybe they wouldn't then turn around and buy the crap that they're buying at the age of 12, 14 years old, hadn't they heard something when they're growing up at home. If they don't hear it at home, you know, then they don't hear it at school, and they don't hear it on the radio, and they listen to what their peers say. So it's just a downward spiral. That's why it's, you know, it's so hard to find anything good. Yeah. A lot of food for thought there. Speaking of food. It's about that time. Where are you off to next? Let's see, Ames, Iowa next week with Warren Bachet and Gene. We're doing a concert there. We did one last year, so it's been, you got to take a long time to get there, but it's fun once we're there. It takes a couple of days. Good. Well, it's been a great pleasure for me. Well, Mark, it's been a real pleasure talking to you too. On behalf of the college, I'd like to thank you for your time, and thank you. I hope that you have a good gig tonight, and that no one throws tunes your way that I don't know. That you don't know. Well, I mean, at this point, I just have to. I mean, it's been happening to me since I was 15. I ought to be used to it by now. You know? Yeah.